So I'm here today with Ben West. Ben, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you, Nick?
I'm doing all right. We were just comparing my tea to your water.
I know, I missed the memo about a tea. I was going to bring a tea as well, and then I thought, oh, you know what? I've had so much caffeine today, so I left it behind. Every other meeting's there, I bought a tea, and the one that I don't bring one to is meant to be a cup of tea and a chat.
It's a proper tea meeting.
Exactly.
Let me start by building you up. Kind of young of age, multi-award winner. How does that make you feel? Kind of, is it something that, do you still get the same kick, and what are you most proud of?
Oh yeah, I mean, to be honest, the awards it's a weird feeling. I mean, obviously it's an incredible thing to be given an award for any work. But I guess for me it's been so bittersweet. That you know, the process that I've gone through to actually get to that point, it's not a nice thing to go through. Often people have said to me, oh, it's so amazing what you're doing, it's so amazing that you've turned this awful tragedy into something so good. And I'm like, actually, I don't see it like that at all. I was faced with this horrific situation where I lost my brother, and the way I see it, I was given a choice of basically doing nothing and feeling awful, or actually going and trying to make a difference. I had no idea that my brother was struggling to the extent that he was. I had no idea that some of my friends were struggling to the extent they were. I had no idea that some of my friends had tried to take their own life before and hadn't told anyone. And I remember just being like, I don't feel like I have a choice. I have to do something. Whether it was survival.
Did you feel that was for yourself, or did you feel respect for others around everyone else, I suppose?
This is where it's interesting, because actually I don't think it was for everyone else. And I think people see people starting charities and doing big events when they go through something like this and think, oh, isn't that amazing, they're going to help so many people. And you know, I'm still around, I'm still doing this stuff because I love helping people and I love having that impact. But I started from survival, you know, and I really mean that. And I think the word survival is completely in the definition of survival. I don't think I would have survived going through that if I didn't have the coping strategies that I had. And part of that coping strategies was being able to help people and help open those conversations. And this was at a time when, you know, I just lost my brother to suicide. The last thing I said to him was in an argument to F off. You know, that was the last thing I said. Yeah. The guilt that I faced was absolutely horrific. I hated who I was because I thought that I'd led him to take his own life. People that came around with flowers that were crying, my parents crying, my brother crying, all these people crying. Every time I saw that, I was like, oh, I've done this. I'm a terrible person. And so for me, I don't know whether it was a case of I need to do something good because I need to prove internally to myself that actually I'm not this terrible person. I can sort of right a wrong morally. Also, it was either that or A-level revision, and I wasn't keen on I wasn't keen on doing some A-level revision.
Always strategic on the whole thing.
Exactly,
I like it.
Exactly. But no, it was self-preservation. It was survival.
And were you naturally a talker? Were you naturally a sharer, or did you have to push yourself? Kind of,
I was absolutely not.
You had the English reservations of.
Definitely. I was. This is where I find it interesting talking about, especially men's wealth, because I was so closed off in terms of emotions. I was part of this huggy friend group, who would always hug and you know, were quite open. And I spent 5 years in this friend group where they would hug me and I wouldn't reciprocate the hug. I'd stand there, arms by my sides, and I wouldn't get involved with that because I thought that's not a manly, tough thing to do. And that was my mindset. And I think so whenever it came to emotions, absolutely not, I wouldn't talk about emotions. I was in the cadets at school. I was, you know, waltzing around with the rifle, doing exercises, being the tough guy. And I don't know why, because that wasn't me at all, but I felt like I had to be. So no, yeah. I definitely wasn't open.
And do you feel yourself kind of, do you feel yourself, I don't know whether to say regressing or going back to that persona, or are you firmly now you're comfortable in that open, or are there subjects where you're like, oh, I'm not going to talk?
Definitely, it definitely exists. I think it's impossible not to. For most of my life, I had this fixed belief that was the thing to be done. And also, let's face it, we talk a lot about mental health nowadays as something that's easy to talk about. It's not.
Yeah.
It's almost because it's become so common, talked about, and it's all over the place, and it's on, leaflets and flyers and billboards and TV and a radio, because it's everywhere. I think there's this expectation that suddenly it's easier to talk about than it was before. No, it's not. It's still really, really hard. And I talk about it every day, like the importance of talking, and it's still not easier. It's a really hard thing to do.
So where kind of, and the question I wanted to ask you, where do you think we as a society are on in our journey about mental health?
This is such an interesting question, because it's so difficult to actually put that pin on a map and show us where we are. I think in some senses we're doing incredibly well. Awareness of mental health is at an all-time high. I mean, it is everywhere at the moment. And in some respects, I think that's really good. But mental health is really interesting. It's not a thing. Mental health is not a thing. It's a word we've given to this part of health.
A collection of stuff.
Right. So the way I was told, and I think this is a great analogy for mental health, is if health is an omelette, the mental health is the egg. And it's the sort of thing that holds everything together, and it's part of all of it. That this mental health is not a thing. When we talk about mental health, there's top level mental health, which is talking about everyday stresses, getting through life, whether you're happy, sad, lonely, whatever. But then there's so many different conversations within that. And there's, people that are bedbound for years that have crippling depression and suicidal tendencies. There's people with that hear voices on a daily basis. There's so much depth in this conversation. And on the top level, on the awareness of mental health as a thing, we're doing really, really well. But I as part of my job, I see that actually on the deep down, the dark, uncovered side of this mental health story, we haven't even touched the surface of some of these stories. And then in a societal wide position of sort of treatment, of research, of early intervention, we're nowhere near good enough. Sam died in 2018. He was 15 years old. Since then, 28,000 people have died from suicide. I've spent the last 5 years campaigning to try and make the situation better. And I'll have meetings with police officers and paramedics and doctors, and every single conversation I hear is, we just can't do this anymore. So I think it's a really interesting question, because on the one hand, it seems on the top level like we're making huge progress, but actually you peel it back and it actually, I think we find that actually we're just sort of scratching the surface, making it seem like progress, but actually there's a lot of very, very difficult work that needs to be done to create progress through the whole conversation, not just on the top level.
So can I ask you then, for you and potentially for other people who are addressing, like, how then, with this vast area which we are actually only touching the surface of, how then do you actually take any kind of wins, I suppose, for want of a better word? How do you kind of at the end of the day, when you kind of, what makes you feel like I've achieved something and actually I've started getting below the surface?
It's difficult. It doesn't always happen. I think anyone that's involved in this area, whether it's in your workplace, whether it's in society, whatever role, it can get very difficult to focus on those small wins, because the grand scheme of things is so bad. And I'll have days where, it was only last week I had a meeting with someone quite senior in the mental health world who came away, and we were both feeling incredibly demoralized by how little we have left to try to fix it. I guess for me, I tend to remind myself why I'm doing this. Why am I speaking about this? Why am I even on this call? And it's because Sam died. I would right now give everything I've got, my life, to go back and have that conversation with him, and to go and help him, and to make sure he was around. Like, I think that's just any person that loves someone else would want to do that. And I'm not necessarily interested all the time in big impact. Actually, sometimes the most meaningful impact is small impact and reaching that one person. And that's something I now do. I volunteer for Shout, the crisis text line, and talk to people that are usually, in the act of suicide, and help them de-escalate. That in the grand scheme of things is one person. It's a very, very, very small impact, but it's something that I will never forget. Someone telling you that, ending a conversation saying, "Thank you so much for saving my life tonight," that's something that you'll never forget. And I guess being brought into this world by the devastation of losing my brother, what keeps me going and what keeps me motivated and what serves that need for progress is having the impact on the small scale, helping that one person have a conversation with a counsellor, encouraging that one friend to go with someone to the doctor and getting them support. It's all focusing back on the small scale, because the large scale of this is so bad. We have to focus on those small stories, those small wins. I lost Sam. I pledged that I would do everything I could to stop that from happening to someone else. Unfortunately, I can't stop all of them, but if you can stop one, or help one person get better, or help one person improve their life, then actually the impact of that is enormous, absolutely enormous. And that, I love, there's a Jewish phrase, and I'll paraphrase it. It's to save a life is to save the whole world. And sometimes it's very easy to get wrapped up in fixing the whole world, when actually, if you save that one person's life, or change that one person's life, or impact that one small scale thing, then in its own way, that is changing the world and changing the large picture. So that's how I remind myself of that's how I give myself the energy and motivation to keep going, even on the bad days. It was just the other day, actually, it was, bless him, it was so lovely. I hosted a panel for Wagamama and with young minds, and I did this whole thing and talked about my experience, and this guy came up to me at the end. He must have been about 13, 14 years old, and he was just like, my sister has been attempting to take her life for 3 years consecutively, a lot. And he says every time they get a full emergency response, ambulances, police, the whole works, and he says he can't leave the house anymore because he can't face the sound of an ambulance. It invokes like I get PTSD, like absolute terror. And I literally just sat him down. I was like, that's so normal. Like, for 2 years, every time I heard an ambulance, I had my spine went, and I absolutely freaked out. And he started crying, and he was just like, this is the first time anyone's told me it wasn't me that's broken. It's actually like quite a normal thing through, like, why would that be your brain trying to protect you? And I guess that's it, isn't it? It's trying to basically be like, we've reached that per one person and make them feel normal and help them. That's huge. And I remember that story, remember that one conversation, because it was so significant. So yeah, for me, it's like, it's all linked back to trying to help, and it feels good to help.
One thing I've got to ask, you're on the board of Wagamama. How did you get on that? How is the experience of being kind of in the big commercial world?
Yeah, it's amazing. Obviously, at a young age, to be thrown right into the big wigs at a company is overwhelming, right? But I think actually it just speaks to the belief they have in me of actually helping to guide their mental health policy internally, their mental health approach externally. It's been amazing. They are genuinely so committed to going above and beyond to support young people. It's written into their brand persona to support young people. And actually, we've been able to create some real amazing change, but also, they've taught me a huge amount. They're so deep rooted in Japanese philosophies that it's you go into these meetings and you come away with this buzz, this feeling of like, wow, kintsugi, ikigai, and all of these things. It's amazing. But no, we've been working together since 2019. I got in touch to do some social media content with them, and eventually worked my way up to speaking to their ex-CEO, Emma Woods. And just after we met, she lost her brother to suicide, and I reached out, and we had a meeting, and we had a chat, just person to person. And ever since then, I've Wagamama is me. I am Wagamama. It's so close and such a lovely relationship, and they do genuinely help people, and are so committed to helping internally, but also externally. It's honestly a privilege to be in that position, but also a learning curve, because there is a lot to learn. But I love it.
Listen, honestly, thank you so much indeed. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and have a great day.
Thank you, Nick.